We know that all of creation, the trees, the birds, the flowers and mountains, the oceans, the animals, and ourselves are all made of atoms and particles that once found their home in the stars. And we know that life, all life, began in the sea. So it is not so unusual that there is something in us that is drawn to the natural world, something deep and profound that remembers. She is known throughout the world as the woman with the chimpanzees. She was only 26 years old when Dr. Louis Leakey, the famed anthropologist, chose her to undertake a pioneering study of chimps in Tanzania, choosing the young Jane Goodall because he believed a mind uncluttered by academia would yield a fresh perspective. And he was right. Her innovative methods and discoveries laid the foundation for all future primate studies. But now, Dr. Goodall is also speaking out on her concerns about the relationship between children and the natural world.
We know from studying chimpanzees that young chimpanzees who've had a disturbed childhood, for whatever reason, have some certain difficulties as adults, particularly in their personal relationships. And I believe that's true for human children too. I think that one of the really sad things that's happening with increased urbanization, and probably also to do with the tremendous increase in human populations right across the earth, is that children are growing up out of contact with nature. And they're not out there as I was as a child, with the grass and the trees and looking at little insects and things. And I don't really know what that does to the development of a child, but I'm quite sure it's not mentally healthy. And I find it terribly sad, because I think children are losing their childhood.
To help provide meaningful connections between children and the natural world, Dr. Goodall has developed a program called Roots and Shoots.
We call it Roots and Shoots because roots creep under the ground and make a firm foundation. Shoots seem new and small, but to reach the light can break through brick walls. And the brick walls are all the problems that we humans have inflicted on this poor old planet. Everything from overpopulation, soil erosion, desertification, the clearing away of the beautiful rainforests, which are the source of so much biodiversity and life, to the pollution, and then the cruelty, the crime, the drugs. All these problems, hundreds and thousands of roots and shoots together can break through. And it's involving young people in 29 countries now in projects that actually show care and concern for the environment, for non-human animals, and for the human community. And there are programs for preschool right up to college. It's really bringing with it a message of hope, and it's probably its most important message is the value of the individual. Every one of us matters. Every one of us has a role to play, and every one of us makes a difference. There's a program which we've now linked in with Roots and Shoots. It's called Green Chimneys, and it's directed by an extraordinary man called Dr. Sam Ross. And these children coming from inner city are at the end of their educational hopes because they've been thrown out of every education system. They are resident there, and they'll be there for 6 months to a year, occasionally longer. It's a farm, and the child must form a relationship with one of the animals, and they get to choose. And of course at first they're not interested, and they don't care about animals, and they don't want to have to look after them. But the whole object is that the child for the first time interacts with a dependent creature, a creature that's then becoming dependent on them. And at first they're very abusive. They're not allowed to hurt the animal, but they shout at it. And then gradually the relationship changes, and suddenly the child realizes here is a creature in whom they can confide, who won't turn on them, who won't give them away, who won't turn and hit. And so this hostile, belligerent attitude changes to one of love.
At first time I saw this, I just wanted to take care of him. I just felt like he was my own little pet, my buddy. I just wanted to take care of him.
There are, of course, many other programs which connect children to nature. At a place called Hidden Villa, volunteer naturalist Lee Cole works with young children from both suburban areas and the inner cities.
They're very familiar with this. Some of them have gardens and some of them have animals, but some of them have never seen a carrot pulled out of the ground. And I've had children say, my mother won't let me eat anything that comes from earth. I remember having a little girl once holding my hand every minute of the way and very fearful that something was going to jump out at her. And by the time we finished walking for 2 hours, I do something called an alone walk, where I get them to walk maybe 5 minutes by themselves on a very well-defined path in the forest where someone's at the beginning and someone's at the end. And the joy on her face when she had done that, she had really accomplished something, and she really had moved through fear to feeling that this was a friendly place, a friendly environment.
At the Marine Science Institute in Redwood City, California, school children get the chance to explore the waters of San Francisco Bay.
Net, you guys. This is a net. What do you think this net
Back in 1970, my father actually started the Marine Science Institute, and the whole concept back then was just to get kids out in the bay. You know, very little was understood about the bay, and we thought if kids started to understand, you know, what was in the water, what was under the surface, that they'd have more of an appreciation for what was going on.
Okay, everybody, listen up. Slowly lower the Peterson grab. A little bit faster than that. When I say okay, everybody listen here. When I say okay, you yell mud. I'm like, go a little fast. Okay. Mud! Excellent. Let it go. Don't touch the rope. Your feet. You come back to this corner right here. That is yours. Lift it up over the railing. And lower the mud grab till it opens. Oh, yeah. Ooh. What we're going to do, first of all, is join Club Mud. You do that by putting a tiny dot, it needs to be visible, on your nose. Just bigger than microscopic. Okay. Everybody do the Club Mud handshake. Use your muddy hand, not your clean one. Okay, Brian, Joey, and Jeff. Any invertebrates you find, like this tiny clam right here, wash it off and put it in this dish. So that's your main goal, is to try to find invertebrates, okay?
What makes them excited is they get to do what comes naturally to them. They get out of the classroom, out in the environment where they belong, and they start to learn. And once you get a live fish in their hand, and once they start really starting to put their mind into, you know, how the animal lives and where it belongs and why it's developed and adapted to these different environments, then they start to learn for themselves what's important to them and also what's out there. If you don't have this kind of connection or this kind of empathy, then you really lose your moral compass. You know, you can have the sciences behind you, you can have mathematics behind you, but without the connection with an environment, you don't have an emotional connection with what's happening out there.
I was at a conference in Japan, and I'll never forget a psychiatrist telling me a story about one of his patients. And she arrived, she had a 13-year-old daughter who was extremely mentally disturbed, was not talking as far as I remember. And so he started talking to her about the early experience of the child. And he learned to his horror that she'd kept her child for the first couple of years of its life in a cardboard box. And she was working, and the child was sitting there in the room in a cardboard box. And he said, well, I mean, you're surprised that your child is not normal? What are you thinking of, putting it in a cardboard box? And she said, but my mother kept me in a cardboard box. So he went on asking questions, and he realized that her mother had worked in the paddy fields. And here's this little baby in a cardboard box, and it's lying there, and up above is the pattern of the trees and the blue sky and the clouds going by, birds and bird song and butterflies. And of course that baby developed into a normal child, probably a very spiritual child. But to have a baby in a cardboard box in an urban setting inside a house, well, you're going to get a very peculiar adult, and she did.
Dr. Sylvia Earle is a world-renowned marine biologist and served as chief scientist for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. She is now president of Deep Ocean Research and Exploration, Incorporated.
I think it's critical for children to be exposed to the natural world at the earliest possible time. When I was a little girl, I lived in New Jersey on a farm. And I remember when I first became aware of the ocean, my family would go to the sea for short vacations in the summer. And before actually getting down to the ocean, I could smell the ocean. There's a wonderful salty smell to the air. And then I could hear the ocean. And then finally, we'd come up over the dunes, and there would be the sea. When I was about 3 years old, the ocean really got my attention. A wave knocked me over. But what really knocked me off my feet, and figuratively as well as literally, was just the awareness that every wave is filled with life, that there are critters out there. And I got lured into the ocean even as a child by my curiosity about the plants and animals that were out there in the sea. I think the sooner that the children can be exposed to nature, to the natural world, the better. From day one, as far as I'm concerned, we are losing touch with nature as a species. We have distanced ourselves from the way things really are, and it's harder for us to connect with the grand earth processes that govern our lives. We think we're in control. Actually, we're not. Climate, weather, the natural world around us is the basis for our life support, the ingredients that make the planet work, upon which we are totally dependent. Unless we become acquainted with it, familiar with it, in harmony with nature, it's harder to understand it and to feel comfortable with big, broad concepts that really are important to us and to our future.
Let the wind plant it.
Mine went that way.
It went that way? Yeah.
I think more and more people are aware of the fact that children really do need to get closer to nature, and that makes for a fuller and more rich emotional life and spiritual life. I think unfortunately most schools in most places I've been to really don't take into account the need of the child to have anything to do with nature. Not enough windows, too much looking at television, too much playing with video. I'm terrified of what the internet is going to do. I mean, it's a wonderful tool, but if it starts taking over more and more of our lives, along with television, and what is it going to do? I know kids of 2 and 3 who are already sitting there playing video games and learning through CD-ROM. And that is, it's an amazing educational tool as long as it's kept to just a small little piece of a child's day. It's so different from going out and having to learn how to get through a wood, to creep through the brambles, not to get scratched, how you move without hurting insects under your feet, how every time you step there's a real surprise. When I first went to this little school, Northern Lights, I was tremendously impressed, partly by the fact that it's very environmentally geared. I mean, it has a Roots and Shoots program there now, a strong one, but when I first went, of course, it didn't, and yet it could have done. I mean, all the pictures on the walls were very typical of a Roots and Shoots group. It sounds corny, but you can almost take hold of the air and feel in your hand you're looking down at something called love. It's very powerful. Every time I go there I think, oh, why can't all children have this?
Some schools are beginning to understand the importance of, call it nature study if you will, studying the natural world, studying science, whatever label you want to put on it, to put human beings in context with the rest of life on Earth. Others are really not doing that for whatever reasons, perhaps because more and more populations are centered in cities and it's harder to find good natural areas, but every place can at least find trees, find birds, find some evidence of the natural world. And it doesn't take a very big stretch to get to a place that is natural and to realize that we are dependent on nature.
In late fall each year, the monarch butterflies that live west of the Rocky Mountains complete a journey of as much as 2,000 miles, returning to the central coast of California. And since 1939, the school children and the town of Pacific Grove have welcomed them with a parade. The parade not only recognizes the cycle of seasons represented by the monarch butterflies, but also encourages the children to realize the part played by other creatures in the natural world.
Place where my heart will always really be, I mean my real home, is in Gombe or some other forest where the trees, peace, birds, contact with nature, contact with a spiritual force that I think binds us all together and gives meaning to life. But I can't stay there now because I've seen the need that exists outside, so I've just felt this compelling need to try and share the wisdom that I've gained from the forest as widely as I can. I've sensed a need in children and I want to try and address it. There's a desperate need in hundreds of thousands of non-human animals, and because people do listen, I have an opportunity, a chance that I mustn't give up, of trying to change people's attitudes to help them better understand the true nature of non-human beings. There are so many ways in which our behavior resembles that of the chimpanzees, and I think the most fascinating are the similarities in the non-verbal communication repertoire. For example, chimpanzees kiss, they hold hands, they pat one another on the back, they embrace, they swagger when they're angry, they laugh and tickle. And it's not just that those postures and gestures look like ours, but they use them in the same kind of context. And so quite clearly they mean the same kind of thing. And then there are so many other ways in which we behave the same way as them. We have the long period of childhood dependency on the mother, the close affectionate bonds that develop between members of a family and occasionally other individuals and last right through the lifespan. Chimpanzee children, like human children, can learn by observing the behavior of others and then imitating and practicing. And chimpanzees can cooperate. They show clear altruism. And in all these different ways, they're so like us. The one really significant difference is that we humans, and only we, have developed a sophisticated spoken language. And it's not that the chimpanzee brain isn't capable of a lot of very complex abstract communication. I mean, they can be taught sign language. They can learn 300 or more signs of ASL, the sign language of the deaf in America. And they can use those signs in meaningful context. They can even invent signs for something that they haven't been taught. But because they haven't developed a sophisticated language, it means that it's only humans who can teach their children about objects that aren't present. Only humans that can discuss events that happened in the distant past, make plans for the far future, and most important of all, we can take an idea, the idea of one person, and bounce it back and forth between two people or a group. And so that one idea can grow and expand from the accumulated wisdom of the group. And I think that is what really has helped us to evolve into the incredibly intellectual creatures that we've become.
If I could be granted one wish, it would be that my species, humankind, wakes up to appreciate the natural world and takes whatever measures are needed to live in harmony with the rest of nature, to use, but not use up, the natural world, to find the answers to some questions that really face us now at the end of this millennium. Where are we going from here? Our population is climbing astronomically. The size of the planet is not. We have, at this point, an opportunity, given our greatly expanded knowledge and our greatly expanded form of communication, to get it right, to take care of the planet that takes care of us. If I had one wish, it would be to make that so.
I sense, as I travel around, that there's a growing desire in people, a need to search for a more spiritual meaning in their lives, and that people are getting fed up with this greedy, materialistic outlook. And as there is more and more concern expressed for the damage that we're doing to the environment, people are much, much more aware. And, you know, there really is a hunger for trying to find a deeper meaning. People often ask me if I'm religious, and I think religion and spirituality are a little different. I'm not sure whether I'm religious, but I know that I believe in a power that is greater than us. It's a power from which I certainly derive strength. You know, there is a tremendous energy all around us, only we can learn to let it flow in. And you can't just let it flow in. I don't believe in that. I think you then need to let it be directed out. And then there's always enough more. You can always be filled up again. There's a text from the Bible that was my grandmother's favorite. As thy days, so shall thy strength be. And I think that's what I live by too.